I, as always, am your host, Richard RJ Eskow. Joining us now is friend of the program, Ryan Grim. You know Ryan Grim from his work as Washington editor of The Intercept, from his Substack, which is badnews.substack.com, and from his broadcasting work at On the Hill, Turning Points, and elsewhere. So he should need no introduction. The only thing I'll add is that his latest book is We've Got People. So, Ryan, welcome back to the program.
I even have a copy right here.
Oh man, how convenient!
I had like 4 boxes that I got out of our mutual friend Alex Lawson's office, and they've been sitting in my basement for months. And I put them up on eBay. My sister put them up on eBay actually. So there's about 15 left if anybody wants them. I've been signing them and sending them out. So man, just have to search on eBay for them. Yeah.
Well,
it's been nice to get them out of the basement.
Yes, I would imagine. And as long as we're talking, you don't want them to get moldy, for one thing.
Yes.
But also we write to be read, right? We don't write
not to sit in the basement. Yeah.
Not to sit in the basement. Yeah. Well, I'm going to change it up a little bit from what I was thinking and just say, since we're talking about We've Got People, in a recent piece you wrote, you pointed out that we've still got people, but that what the other side of the political struggle, thinking of the Democratic Party in this case, has more of than ever, it seems, is money, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you interviewed this fellow, Dimitri. I mean, he's known by one name like Sting or Cher or something. Yes. And frankly, I don't remember his last name.
Doesn't matter. You don't need it.
It doesn't matter.
Just Dimitri.
If you don't know, you don't deserve to know.
Right. That's right.
So Dimitri is I guess, a tech billionaire.
Yeah.
Who's not only got a lot of money, but he's rallying other people with money to put money into Democratic primary races. This definitely has a lot to do with one of your major themes in your writing, not only the book We've Got People, but in your general coverage, which is the struggle for progressives to capture more power in the Democratic Party. They have relatively little right now, mm-hmm. more than they did. And it seems to me that Dimitri and his colleagues are doing a pretty increasingly effective job boxing in progressives. I mean, Summer Lee in Pennsylvania won despite their massive investment, but here in Maryland, they defeated Donna Edwards, I believe. Mm-hmm. A number of other progressives went down. So first of all, what's your take? Have I summarized the struggle accurately? What did I leave out?
I think that's right. And it's interesting to go back and look at the timeline, because if you look at the timeline that I lay out in the book, you've got the rise of big money in the late 1970s, and then really becoming dominant in the 80s and 90s. And then you have the rise of Move On in the early 2000s into the Howard Dean campaign, developing this grassroots small donor infrastructure that is then able to compete against the big money, which then kind of really comes into its own with the first Bernie Sanders presidential campaign. He ends up raising more than $250 million, which just shocks the political system, because now you can run a national campaign with just people and people delivering the money. You start to see even Schumer after that in 2018 very much lean into small donors, just bombing the inboxes of regular Democrats. I'm sure everybody here has been the victim of that evolution. But what it meant is that Democrats in 2018 in Senate races and House races were able to really outcompete even Republicans. You had the candidate that lost to Susan Collins in Maine, if you remember. She finished with $15 million in the bank. And I think it's still actually sitting in her campaign account, because there's only so much money you can spend in Maine. Like, there are only a couple of television networks. There's only a couple of, there's Portland and whatever else. And there's only so many hours in a day. And they and the super PACs just maxed out. Like, there was nothing left to buy. Like, unless they were going to wheat paste some some maple trees. They were out of ways to spend money in Maine. And that produced in people like Schumer a reorientation of their politics. If you look at his kind of 2021 agenda, he fought against, he was Wall Street Chuck for his whole entire career. And then he's pushing to allow for Medicare to negotiate with drug prices. He's trying to close the carried interest loophole because he wants to make sure that his donors are taken care of. And to him, the donors were these kind of resistance Democrats who were spending not just $27 at a clip for Bernie Sanders, but they were giving $25 or $50 to 10 or 20 different candidates. Mm-hmm. That's the advantage for Democrats of having these upper middle class coalition with some extra disposable income. Because while Bernie's people were really scraping to give everything they could to him, their parents have a lot more, and their parents aren't like Dimitri rich.
Right.
But they can, if they get angry, they can send $25 to 10 different Senate candidates. And remember, who was Amy McGrath in Kentucky? Would they give her $100 million or something to lose by 20 points? You have Jamie Harrison, $75 million or something to lose to Lindsey Graham by like 10 points or something. It wasn't even close. So then then you have Citizens United coming in. But Citizens United was not a kind of didn't change politics overnight. The 2012 campaign saw super PACs for the first time. 2014, you start to see super PACs dipping into Senate races, but not really House races. It's not really until the last cycle or two that you really saw super PACs coming in and jumping into individual congressional races. And that's what really changed the game, because you can now compete. Like if you're a congressional candidate with grassroots support, you can get $100,000, $500,000. You can get into the ball game in a way that you couldn't before. But they're coming at people like Summerlee and Donna Edwards with $5 to $10 million, which it just changes the game. It just fundamentally changes everything. They went after Nina Turner they claimed that she opposed universal health care and the minimum wage. Remember, because just having a progressive background isn't enough if they're going to just straight up lie about you in the last month of the campaign without a chance to rebut things. And so so Dimitri, he's not a billionaire himself, but he's doing better than you and me. But yes, he's like Reid Hoffman's right-hand man and has been very good at organizing a network of donors who will just follow his lead. And he works directly with Mark Mellman, who runs the Democratic Majority for Israel, DMFI, and they collectively just pick races and boom, and they can instantly overnight just drop millions into them. And that's before you get to AIPAC. AIPAC's separate but related beast.
In a sense, this is an opportunity for these donors and for certain politicians who want their money. For example, as it becomes more and more politically acceptable to criticize Israel over its treatment of Palestine, that creates an opening to raise money by saying, no, I'm a stalwart fan of Israel, which has always been the default go-to for members of both parties. But it seems to me that along with this reinfusion of anti-progressive money, which seems to have an attraction of its own to a lot of wealthy people, the specific issue of Israel also becomes a way for a kind of bundler, whether that's his title or not, like Dimitri, to really add to his war chest. Is that a fair analysis?
It's a way to animate people who might otherwise say, you know what, this is a Democratic primary. I'm not for Medicare for all, but I don't think it's really going to happen anyway. So why am I going to help you spend $5 million in this campaign? And then, you say, well, guess what? These progressives are aligned with Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. And here's what Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib say about Israel, about the occupation, about conditioning aid, about boycott, divestment, sanctions. And so, and then if your interest truly is just the issue of Israel-Palestine, like some donors it is, you're happy. If you're actually trying to wage a civil war, against the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, you're happy to then work with them and just lump it all together. And of course, and it should be said, none of the ads that these millions of dollars spend ever mention Israel or Palestine. Like they poll whatever they think it is that's going to work in that race against that particular candidate, and that's what they talk about. And because talking about Israel Palestine in a Democratic primary is not going to work out for DMFI or AIPAC, because there's we must give unconditional support to this far right wing government, which is rapidly expanding its occupation and annexation of this territory. Like it's not going to fly.
Right, absolutely. And it seems to me that, of course, the flip side of this as a power equation is that the Democratic Party leadership is allowing it. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but they don't have to allow first, whether it's Schumer, whether it's Nancy Pelosi, now Hakeem Jeffries, they don't have to say, yeah, come on in and spend your dark money in our primaries. That is a policy decision on the part of the party itself, isn't it?
And Nina Turner, in fact, introduced and had a coalition behind her supporting a resolution at the DNC that would bar dark money. And there's a lot of ways you could write it, because of course you'll have people that say, well, what about Sunrise Movement or Justice Democrats or Wolfpack or these other organizations that want to support gun safety groups. You could write it in a way that made it transparent and democratic and leveled the playing field. That wasn't the thing. It wasn't defense of Sunrise and Justice Democrats that stopped the DNC from including Nina Turner's position. Yes, but she's tried, and the party has consciously chosen to go the other way, that they're welcoming this money, which is becoming it could become a real problem for them, to the extent that AIPAC takes over from DMFI and Dimitri, and AIPAC does not have the interests of the Democratic Party in mind. Dimitri says that he's trying to fight against fascism, and so in this fight against fascism, he wants to support the Democratic Party. AIPAC doesn't even pretend that. Like, AIPAC does not care, and AIPAC leans heavily Republican. They're only playing in Democratic primaries because they want to beat whoever might align themselves with Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. After they spent millions of dollars accusing Summer Lee of not being a good enough Democrat, they then spent money trying to elect the Republican in the general election. So that it's just cynical all the way through.
Right, and your comments, Ryan Grim, get to what I was just going to bring up, which is I always worry when I look at or study the internal workings of the Democratic Party. I always look out for confirmation bias on my own part, right? Because I am very progressive, so I always have to be careful not to interpret every fact, every data point as confirming that the best thing would be for the Democratic Party to move left. But I do have to say, reading your work, looking at some of the races more closely, tracking them the best I can, I do, and just trying to get the pulse or the sense of what the electorate's about, I do have a genuine concern that that this promotion of insider, whatever you want to call them, these types of candidates that are defeating the Donna Edwards, defeating Nina Turner's and so on, that it's going to hurt the party in the long run by reinforcing the impression that it's money driven rather than working for the interests of working class people. Am I just projecting, or is there some element of truth to that, you think?
No, I think that's right. And what you can, in order to push back against your confirmation bias, you can look at it from perspectives other than your own. And one of the most interesting to me is the New Democrats. And New Democrats are, for people who are just tuning in, are they basically the right-wing pro-business coalition within the Democratic Party that kind of flowed out of the DLC and the Clintonian Clintonian approach to politics in the 1990s. They call themselves a New Democrat coalition. And a lot of these New Democrats, they serve in swing districts. So they are the types that care, obviously, first and foremost about fundraising. But, secondly, they care about running on an agenda that is popular so that they can win re-election. Because you need both. Because if your agenda is unpopular, you need a lot more money to kind of muscle it through. So they're trying to find the right balance, the least unpopular agenda that they can get through with the most amount of money or the least amount of fundraising. Right. And so if you look at what their agenda has turned to in recent years, you see how the public wants a much more aggressive, progressive agenda. The leading champions of the child tax credit throughout the Biden administration were the New Democrats. Progressives were all supportive of it. But Susan Delbene, the chair of the New Dems, was the person who championed it, who was the lead author on it in the House, who would bring it up in the meetings. And she and others and Katie Porter is a frontliner, so that was helpful, like to have her, a progressive, in there with them arguing for it. But all these other frontline New Democrats, pro-business New Democrats, were saying we need wins like this to run on. And they wanted the Build Back Better to pass so that they could run on it and point to it, because they were hearing from voters that number one thing they're hearing in focus groups, Democrats haven't done anything for me. Biden hasn't done anything for me. And they wanted to point, oh, what about that $300 you get per kid? Because that is so easily understood. Oh, that's great. $300 a kid. That has been very helpful to me. Biden did that. Boom. That your question is answered. Then now you move on to the next question with voters, and they're much more receptive to hearing from you. And that really cuts against the Dimitri frame, which Dimitri's frame is people only vote based on fear of the other side, that fascists are at the gate. We've got to vote against the fascists. But why are all of these politicians whose entire careers depend on getting reelected saying that, no, we want this to happen? And that is, to your point, totally different than the old Democratic Party. If you remember in 2009 and 2010, when the centrists like Tom Perriello, Tom Perriello's not a centrist, progressive in a swing district, when swing district Democrats voted for the climate change bill and for the ACA back in 2009-10, they did so believing that it would cost them at the polls, but that it was the right thing to do. And Tom talks about how it's his proudest vote, even though it helped cost him his seat. They don't feel that way anymore. Now, when they vote for the IRA, when they vote for child tax credit, these other key items of the Democratic agenda, they feel like it actually helps them in elections. And one of the striking things about it, I don't want to sound cynical, Ryan. Well, okay, maybe I do. But one of the striking things about it was back in those days, you would hear the Democratic leadership, you would hear Nancy Pelosi say, my majority makers. She would use that, right? Right. My majority makers, these frontline Democrats, Medicare for all sounds fine, but my majority makers don't want it because they know it will hurt them. And so we're not going to put it to a vote. You'd hear that, for example, or whatever the issue was, if it was progressive. Now you have, and obviously she's not a leader anymore, so we don't know how she would have treated it, but now you have Hakeem Jeffries there. You have these quote-unquote majority makers pushing these issues, yet we're not seeing them come to a vote on the floor of Congress. John Larson's bill to expand Social Security, bring it into actuarial balance, not coming up on the floor. Very popular, endorsed by perhaps the entire Democratic caucus, certainly most of it, and very popular with Republican as well as Democratic voters, Tea Party voters when they were a category. So it seems that at least now Schumer seems to have heard that music a little bit and moved accordingly a little bit, but we're not seeing the shift that would have said, well, this is what our frontliners want, right? So there must be, whether it's big money, donors, or whatever it is, we're seeing some other factor come into play, aren't we? Well, you had to have speaking of dark money again, you had to have a dark money group through no labels, and it's tiny little organized rump through Josh Gottheimer and the rest of his gang of nine. If you remember that, with them just trying to derail Build Back Better. They had a 4 or 5 vote margin, and if it were just up to the House, they were moving through multi-trillion-dollar packages there. And if you add up the American Rescue Plan, the chip subsidies, the IRA, and other pieces of legislation, we're talking six trillion or something of spending in the first 2 years of the Biden administration, above and beyond what they were, the regular spending. That's a fundamental shift, from what was being done before. The Obama stimulus was 700 or so, 750 by the time it was completely whittled down. Yeah. And half tax cuts. Yeah.
Right. A third, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was a third tax cuts. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
That's a good point, Ryan, and it brings to mind a little bit the first House session under Obama, 2008 to 2010, where led by Pelosi in that case as well, where they passed significantly more progressive legislation than the Senate was willing to do, and one difference between that period and the first Biden term has been that Obama was taking this, my friends on the left, my friends on the right, kind of holding himself aloof, whereas we have seen, I assume, in respond to strong voter feelings, we have seen Biden, surprisingly given his history, spend his first 2 years being pretty strong on a number of these issues. Certainly it was his bill, the original big Build Back Better, and we could criticize the way it was structured or presented or whatever, but the fact is it was ambitious in the context of recent political history, right? The House was much more supportive of it. He had the problem he described with the Senate, but I'm now wondering, it seems to me, and people have talked about this a little bit, there's a pivot on Biden's part towards what's called the center here in Washington, D.C. That, for example, I just finished a piece on the politics of Social Security and billionaires. And Biden, for the first 2 years, was saying he wanted to expand Social Security. Now all his rhetoric is, I won't let them cut one penny. So, subtle but significant shift, right? And I'm wondering if that, and of course we had the compromises he had to make to get in terms of the climate or whatever. But in addition to getting things through the Senate, I'm wondering if there's something else going on with Biden rhetorically and strategically, whether he's responding to, whether it's these big money donors or the sort of, to me, seems ill-advised, political consultancy thinking that you got to tack to the center if things look rough for you. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think our entire structure, our entire political economy is organized against working people and against the idea that wages ought to go up, and against the idea that workers need more power in the workplace. And I think that flows through not just campaign finance, but the economy and the political economy in general. I think greed. We've heard a lot about greedflation, but I do think that whether it's organized or not, there's something built into the American political economy that rejects worker power as a virus that is getting into the body politic. And I think as these corporations were raising their margins, and the studies have shown it's like upwards of half of inflation can be charted to just decisions to jack up prices because they had kind of political wiggle room, and they felt like they could get away with it because of the kind of conditions and the climate going on. I think that some of them understood that this was weakening the power of the progressive wing of the party, that this was draining New Deal energy out of the kind of Biden administration by putting more pressure on workers by forcing them to spend so much of their wages on increased prices. So I think that it was both greed in the sense of extracting whatever profit they could at the moment. And people say, well, greed is constant. Yes, greed is constant, but the political window opened because the Supreme Court can do whatever. Take the Supreme Court, for example. They can do whatever they want. They have lifetime appointments. Today, they decided not to strike down this portion of the Voting Rights Act. And you can be cynical and say they're doing that because they're keeping their powder dry because they want to blow up the Voting Rights Act completely later, and they have other right-wing agenda items that they want to tick off. But even that cynical interpretation implies that they have some limit to their political capital.
Right. I had exactly the same response to that decision, by the way, that they're
feeling it.
If public sentiment gets too strong against them, they understand that Congress might act in ways that would limit their power, which Congress has the ability to do. It could add 20 judges to the Supreme Court if it wanted to. Right? There's nothing in the Constitution.
They could.
Limits it to 9.
And you can also move them to the circuit court and all this. And so I think that CEOs felt like they had more political wiggle room to raise prices. And I think that a lot of them also knew that was good for them politically. And by them, I mean the capitalist class, that against worker militancy and against wages. And those are just a couple of elements. You've got the Federal Reserve, of course, that raises interest rates at any hint that wages are going up. Like they are public about that notion. Wages are going up. We need to, artificially intervene into the economy. Although there's no such thing as like artificially intervening because the economy is a production of people. Right. But you know what I mean? They see wages going up. They need to come in and they need to just push them back down. So everything is designed around that. And I think that produces the kind of reaction that you're now seeing in the White House to tack away from what was, really energy that was reminiscent of the New Deal, like of Biden saying he wanted to be the next FDR. Like you don't hear that anymore.
No, he's not going to say of the bankers, "I welcome their hatred," right, as FDR did. Well, Ryan, before I let you go, I want to make sure we at least touched on a couple things. One was you recently interviewed Imran Khan, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, as I did a couple months ago, and I've been following events there through sources, including in or of the military there, the military being a major force. That's a struggle for democracy too, just as we're seeing in terms of dark money and big money in the United States, but a much more overt struggle, it seems. What was your takeaway after first of all, what was your sense of Khan as a figure, as a human being, as a figurehead? What was your sense of him?
I mean, he didn't feel like somebody who was looking for a way out. He's cornered. He was tweeting today that he's facing more charges than anybody in world history. His home is surrounded. Most of his party seems to be locked up. They keep tacking on new charges. They're hinting at murder charges and terrorism charges. And yet he doesn't seem like he's looking for any out or escape or any asylum. He seems to want to fight it to the end. And the point that he made, I thought, to me was interesting, that this is the first time in Pakistan history that the military is gunning for a complete takeover without the support of the country. That it's untoward to say it, but as he mentioned, when it came to several of the military coups, they actually had this general public support. They weren't voted in through the ballot box, but you could just tell and feel. And I always used to wonder how that could ever be possible. But then watching MSNBC during the Trump administration celebrate the national security state and the military against Trump, you could actually imagine that if Milley or somebody pulled off a coup, that people that a couple years earlier you would never have thought could ever possibly support a military coup, might be getting on air saying, let's give them a chance.
Right. That's a great point. And, I got to tell you, Ryan, a related point. A couple of times, believe me, I defer to no one in my loathing of Donald Trump, but there were a couple of times when they went after him for doing what seemed like reasonable, mild but reasonable things regarding Afghanistan or whatever. There were a couple of times I thought, I wonder what these people would be doing to Bernie right now if
Right.
Bernie had become president. I think they might have been pulling the same moves with the same
Yeah.
liberal support,
Yeah.
and so
Right. And then
it's
they'd have
that,
right wing support too. Right.
and right, like
Right.
as we have now with the neocons and so on. But it strikes me with Imran Khan that a crisis of democracy in the nation's in the world's fifth most populous country, nuclear power, tactically important, strategically important, astonishes me. This story hasn't gotten more interest before now. So I was glad to see you pick up on it. And before we go, just very briefly, you also wrote about Australia and sentiments there about Julian Assange and about a new FBI investigation, which is intriguing. I certainly think as a journalist, I can't speak for you, but I certainly think as a journalist that this is criminalizing journalism, that's what they're doing to Assange. And it seems to me if the FBI, as you report, and as they've reported in Australia, if the FBI is opening a new investigation, doesn't that mean that maybe they think they can't really convict him based on what they've got?
It could be. And we actually tweaked our headline to say reopens to say targeting Assange to involving Assange, because we don't know for certain that they're targeting Assange. It could be a counterintelligence type of investigation. However, what it does show is that they're still looking at 2010 and 2011 because of the people that they're talking to. Still not, and I think a lot of people don't understand that. They think that Assange is maybe being, charged with something involving Russia in 2016 or the CIA in 2017, and that's just factually not true. Like these are charges that are very specifically related to the leaks from Chelsea Manning to WikiLeaks that exposed U.S. war crimes. And I think you're right that it could also show that they don't feel confident about their case, because there's very little that he did that isn't normal journalism. Once you take aside the fact that he's an eccentric person and that the site WikiLeaks is different kind of in structure in the way that it publishes documents rather than kind of writes them up. But otherwise, everything is journalism. The thing where they get him for attempting to solicit or whatever, first of all, journalists solicit information all the time. Secondly, he was even careful. If you remember, the line that he said to Chelsea Manning in their instant message was, Manning was like, "I could probably get some more information if you would like it." And Assange said, "In my experience, curious eyes never run dry." Like very elliptical, like even seems like he's trying to be careful. They also went after him for offering to help Manning unsuccessfully, but help Manning kind of cloak her attempt to get into back into the system and not get caught. To me, that's source protection. Like or Woodward and Bernstein, committing a crime by moving their plant from one side to the other, saying we want to meet in a parking garage, rather than just being open and honest and meeting right in front of the FBI building.
Right.
Or
for that matter, calling their source, if it was their source, Deep Throat instead of the name. Are you at that point? So,
you're helping them conceal a crime according to the prosecutor's logic.
Yeah, and I was glad to see you cover that, Ryan, because to me it's one of the most important stories out there right now. And first they came for So all right, well, Ryan Grimm, Washington editor for The Intercept, and also badnews.substack.com, and author of the book We've Got People. You may have to come up with a new edition called We've Got People, but they've got a hell of a lot of money. Thanks so much for your great reporting as always, and thanks so much for coming on the program.
I thought about calling my next book "They've Got Money." Yeah,
that'll be a bestseller. Yeah. Okay, thanks again.
All right, thanks, RJ.
Yeah, we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.